In previous lessons, we executed our program linearly, line by line, but today we are going to learn fundamental building block of code that gives us opportunity to add decision-making capabilities to our program. I am talking, of course, about if-else statement. So let's take a closer look at if-else statement code. So if some condition is true, we are going to execute code in the first curly brackets after if statement. And if condition is false, we are going to execute code in curly brackets after else statement. So let's consider the next example. Let's say I'm building a website and my website has some adult content. So I want to check if a person who is visiting my website is older or younger than 18. So first of all, I'm going to ask our user, cout, enter your age, and I'm going to create a variable where I'm going to store the age of our user. Next, we are going to read age from the console. And next, we are going to check if the age of our user is more or less than 18. So our condition will be if age is bigger than 18. And if age is bigger than 18, we are going to greet our user, cout, you are older than 18, welcome, end line. And if our statement is false, if the age of our user is equal or less than 18, we are going to write a different statement. Cout, you are too young for this website. Okay, now let's build and run our program. So enter your age. If I enter something like 15, you can see the result. The response of my program is you are too young for this website. And if now I enter some age bigger than 18, let's say 25, you're older than 18, welcome. Okay, here we use something called comparison operators. Comparison operators in programming are symbols used to compare values to make decision based on the result of comparison. So what comparison operators we can use? It's operators bigger and less. We also can use operators bigger equal and less equal. So for example, if I want to accept users that are also 18 years old, I'm going to add here operator bigger equal, and I'm going to change my statement a little bit. You are 18 or older than 18, welcome, and let's check that everything is working. Now if I enter age 18, I expect to see you are 18 or older than 18, welcome. Okay, two more comparison operators we can use is equal. If, for example, I want to run some separate piece of the code if my value of variable is equal to some value. And also the last one is not equal. So this is comparison operators we can use. And to demonstrate you how to use these two operators equals and not equals, let's write the guess game. So the idea of the guess game is that my program will contain some name, let's say name Alex, and our user should guess the name that our program is thinking about. So let's write to the console guess the name, and we are going to create variable where we're going to store our guess, and we are going to read our guess, the name that the user will enter, and if our guess is equal to name that program is thinking about. Okay, so this operator equal is actually operator we're using to assign some value to the variable, so it's not correct to use it when you want to compare two variables. Instead of this, we are going to use comparison operator equal equal. So if guess is equal to name, okay, we are going to write correct, and if our guess is wrong, we are going to write wrong. Okay, now let's build and run our program. And if I will enter some guess like name Diana, you can see result is wrong. My guess is not equal to the name that computer is thinking about. And of course I can rewrite this piece of the code. I can write if guess is not equal to the name my program is thinking about. I can write this line wrong, else we are going to write this line correct. So it's the same code, but we are using here a different comparison operator, not equal. So if guess is not equal to the name, we are typing wrong, and else if guess is equal to name, we are typing correct. So let's try to guess our name, and you can see that if I guessed name, we have response correct. Okay, so here I used the operators equal and not equal for the string. So you may think about the next question. Can I compare strings using operators bigger or smaller? And yes, you can. Let's write the next program. String 1 will be apple, and let's create another string variable s2, and we'll initialize it with string banana. And now I will try to compare these two strings using bigger or smaller operator. So when you compare two strings using operators bigger and smaller, our program compares strings using lexicographic rules. So if s1 is bigger than s2, it means that in lexicographic meaning s1 is going in the dictionary after s2, we're going to type s2 space s1 and line. And else if s1 is smaller or equal to s2, we're going to type them in different order, s2 and line. Okay, let's try to build and run our program. And you can see that since apple is less than banana, the letter A in the alphabet is before the letter B, we have now the result apple and banana. If, for example, I use something like apple and apricot, now we're going to compare these two strings. So the comparison will be char by char. First characters are equal, second characters are equal, third character P and R are not equal. And since P is going before R in the alphabet, you have result apple apricot. Okay, so we discussed how to give your program a choice to execute one piece of the code if some condition is true, or another piece of the code if this condition is false. And you might think about, well, what if I want to have more branches of code? What if I want to execute one piece of the code if one condition is true, a different piece of the code if different condition is true, and so on. So let's go back to our program where we asked our user to enter his age. And let's say for now I want to give my user different options. So if my user is older than 18, he or she can view all content on my website. If my user is between 18 and 13, I will show him or her movies with PG-13 rating and younger. And if my user, let's say, is 6 or younger, he or she can view only kids movies. So my first condition is age of the user is bigger or equal than 18. In this case, I'm going to write to my user, you can watch any movies. Okay, so my user who are older than 18 can view all movies, and now I have several more categories of the users left. The users from 18 to 13, from 13 to 6, and younger than 6. So to create the next decision for my second categories of the user, I'm going to use else if statement, and in else if statement I'm going to check if age of my user is bigger or equal than 18, and if it's true, if age of my user is bigger or equal than 18, I'm going to write you can watch PG-13 movies. You can watch PG-13 movies. Okay, so now I have solutions for the users older than 18, older than 13, and I have two more categories left. It's users from 13 to 7 and younger than 7. So if age of my user is bigger or equal than 7, I'm going to write you can watch PG movies else. And now I have one more category of users left. It's user who are younger than 7. And for them I'm going to type you can watch kids movies. Okay, so what's going on in this program? If I'm a user who is older than 18, let's say I'm 20, I'm checking the first condition, if, and I see that this condition is true, so I execute this line of the code. You can watch any movies. And I see that the next blocks of the code starts with F, so I'm just going to the end of this statement to the line return 0. If, for example, my age is 15, so I check first condition and I see that this condition is false for me. My age is 15, so I'm checking the next condition, else if. I see that I satisfy this condition, my age is bigger than 13, so I execute this line of the code. You can watch PG-13 movies. Then I see that after this block of the code I have different else's, so I'm not going to execute them, and go to the line 26, return 0. If say my age is 5, I check every condition. I check this condition and it's false for me. Check next one, it's also false, my age is 5. Check this one, age bigger than equals 7, it's also false for me. So I execute code in the last else statement. So let's check if our program is working. Enter your age. So if, for example, I enter my age 5, you can see the result. You can watch kids movies. The code from the last statement is executed. And if, say, for example, I enter age 15, you can watch PG-13 movies. So I suit this second block of the code because my age is less than 18, but it's still bigger or equal than 13. So earlier we said that the expression in this round brackets is actually some conditions that is true or false, so it's a bool variable. And instead of different conditions, we actually can use in these parentheses different bool variables. So if our boolean variables is true, condition is true, we execute the respective code, and if condition is false, we execute different piece of the code. So let's create some program that is going to use boolean variable as a condition. I want to write a program that will give advices to my user depending on the weather condition. So let's create bool variable is raining, and I'm going to write the next statement. If is raining, if this bool variable is equal to true, I'm going to write to my user advice take an umbrella, and let's write here end line. And what I want to do now, I'm not going to create else statement. I'm just going to write another piece of the code after our if statement. Shout, have a great day, end line. And let's check how our program will be executed depending on the value of our bool variable. So if is raining is true, what will happen? Let's build and run our program. And you can see that since our statement is raining is true, we execute code in these curly brackets, and then we execute the next line of our code. So if, for example, some piece of the code in your program is optional, of course I can write this code like this. If it's raining, write this string, and if it's not raining, do nothing. But instead of this, I can just write my if, and if condition is true, the piece of the code inside of the curly brackets will be executed. And actually I can create several ifs like this. You are not limited by the quantity. So let's create another bool variable is windy, and let's also write is windy is true. And if is windy, we are going to give our user advice. Shout wear a coat, end line. Okay, let's build and run this program. And you can see the result. We checked our first if statement is raining, and it's true, so we executed code take an umbrella. And since the next statement also starts with if, we also check the next statement because it's a new if statement, and if is windy, we execute this code in the curly brackets where a code. If, for example, I will write each of this variable equal to false. So in this case, I think you understand that we are not going to execute any of this code. We are going just to write to our console, have a great day. And you can see that indeed we checked both statements, both of them are false, so we just write have a great day to our console and finished execution of our program. Okay, so we created two bool variables, is raining and is windy, and let's say I want to give some new separate advice to my user if both of this statement is true. So I want to execute different code if is raining is true and is windy is also equal to true. To do this, to check both statement, after the first statement, use operator and your next condition you want to check. So if is raining and is windy, let's actually write something new. Let's copy this phrase here. And if it's raining and windy, I'm going to tell my user better stay at home. Better stay at home. And else if is raining, I'm going to ask my user take an umbrella. And if first condition is false and second condition is false, I'm not going to do anything. So I'm going to skip our else condition. Let's now try to build and run our program. And you can see the result. Our advice of our program is better stay at home. So we checked our first condition, is raining and is windy, and it's true, both bool variables is true, so we give our user advice better stay at home. Since next condition is a branch of our if, else if, we just skip it and go to the line 17 and execute this line and write have a great day. But if, for example, is raining as true and is windy is false, let's now try to run our program in this case, and you can see the outcome in this configuration. We skipped our first statement because is raining is true but is windy is false, and we executed the next piece of the code, take an umbrella, because is raining is true. So let's talk in more details about this and operator. This is called logical operator. Logical operators in programming are used to combine different conditions, different Boolean values. So how actually they work? If we use operator and, the entire condition is true if both conditions are true. So if is raining is true and is windy is true, the entire condition is also true. But if one of the conditions is false, let's say is raining is false, is windy is true, the outcome of the and logical operator is false. Like you can see here, is raining true, is windy false. So result of this condition is equal to false. What other logical operators we can use? So we just discussed the operator and. Another logical operator is OR, that is written like two vertical lines. So operator OR create condition that is true if one of the conditions is true. So if is raining is true and is windy is true, the result of is raining or is windy is also true. If is raining is true but is windy is false, result of the OR operator is also true, because we need at least one condition to be true. And if both of these conditions is false, false or false equal to false. So if we try to run our program right now, you can see that as a result, we executed our first block of the code, because is raining is true and is windy is false, but true or false equal to true. So we executed this code better stay at home. And one more logical operator is operator not. This operator changes the value of your bool variable. If this condition was false, not false is equal to true. So if you used logical operators before, I think it should be very obvious for you. If it's your first time when you see logical operators, just look at this slide. And if you have any problems with memorizing, just go back to this piece of the lecture and check what will happen when you combine two different bool variables with AND or NOT operator. Okay, let's go back to our code where we asked our user to enter his age, because I want to give you another example so you can better understand how to work with these logical operators. And I'm going to create a program that will assign my user for the grant program if my user is between 18 and 33 years old. So I will call this program, let's call it grants for young scientists. And what I'm going to check if the age of my user is bigger than 18 but less than 33. Okay, sorry if you are older than 33, so am I. We are not young scientists anymore. So if age of my user is bigger or equal than 18, and a second condition will be age of my user is less or equal than 33. In this case, I'm going to write to my user, you can apply for grant, and line. Else, if my user is too old or too young, I'm going to write, sorry, you don't meet our requirements. Okay, let's check that everything is correct. Let's build and run our program. And let's say my age is 5 years old, and you can see the result, sorry, you don't meet our requirement. Okay, but let's say I extended my grants program, and now the user can apply for the grant if he or she is a student. So I'm going to add one more variable. Let's say it will be bool variable if student is student. And let's just assign it in our program is equal to true. And what I want to do, I want to allow my user to apply for grant if he or she is in this age boundaries between 18 or 33, or my user is student. To do this, I will add one more pair of round brackets between my first condition, and my second condition will be or is student. So what's going on here now? First, I'm going to compare this condition in parentheses. First condition, age is bigger than 18 and age is less than 33. If both of them are true, with the and logical operator, I will get the result for this first condition in the round brackets equal to true. If one of these conditions is false, we are going to get the result for this condition in the round brackets false. And then we are going to combine this condition in round brackets with condition is student. So if is student is true, as you already understand, we are going to execute this piece of the code. You can apply for grant. Let's try to build and run our program. And let's say my age is 36, but you can see result is still you could apply for grant because we used condition if your age is acceptable or you are student. Okay, but let's say now we have some changes in our grant system and we actually don't accept students because we think that, okay, our applicants should be already scientists, so they already graduated. In this case, I'm going to write our conditions like this. Our user should be older than 18, younger than 33, and our user is not student, so I'm going to use here not operator. Let's now execute our program like this and enter your age. And even if I now enter some age that satisfy our age boundaries, You can see the results. Sorry, you don't meet requirements, because now we actually have three conditions. First one is true, second one is true, but not is student is false. So the entire condition is false, and result is sorry, you don't meet our requirements. Okay, but let's now go even further. I want to have the different outcome for the case when he or she is student and for the case when he or she is not. So in the case when our user if is student, so inside my if statement, I'm going to create different if-else statement. Okay, so if my age is acceptable, I'm going inside of this curly brackets, and I execute code inside of this first curly brackets, and inside of this next curly brackets, I'm going to have another if-else statement. So if my user is not student, you can apply for grant, else I know that the age is appropriate, but I want to give my student advice that graduate first, then apply. And line. And the situation when we have another if-else statement inside of the if-else statement is called nested if-else statement. Let's try to once again execute our program. And I am going to enter my age. Once again, let's enter 23. And you can see a result now is graduate first, then apply. Because we went to the first curly brackets, and here we made another if-else statement. And since we are a student, we went to this line of the code, graduate first, then apply. Okay, you might think that it's actually a very cool idea to use if-else statement inside of the another if-else statement, because you can create many branches of your code, but actually it's very bad practice to create these different branches, because it makes code very complicated, not readable, and it will be very hard for your colleagues and another developer who will look through this code after you to debug it, to understand it. So if you have this situation when you met nested if-else statement, it's always a great idea to sit and think a little bit. How can you remove this if-else nested statement and create maybe if-else, if-else, if-else statement? So let's think, how can we refactor this code? You can see that nested part we have in the first statement, but our second part is actually not nested. So maybe it's a good idea to rewrite our code a little bit and actually start with checking if our user is too young or too old for our grant. So instead of this code, I'm going to rewrite my condition. I'm going to check if the age of my user is less than 18, or so my user is too young, or my user is too old. So if my user is too young or my user is too old, I'm going to write him, sorry, you don't meet our requirements. So after we checked this condition, the condition if our user is too young or too old, now we have left only with the users with the suitable age. So we're going to write the next statement as else if, and else if our user is student, and in this case, else if our user is student, we are going to write him graduate first, then apply. And now we have left only with the people with acceptable age and acceptable status. So for these people, we are going to write you can apply for grant. Now let's remove this outdated code, and you can see the result. Now instead of nested if else, instead of if else inside of if else, and so on and so on, we have code that is very easy to understand. If your age is not acceptable, you have one outcome. If your age is acceptable but you're student, second outcome. And if your age is acceptable and you're not student, third outcome, you can apply for grant. Okay, since we started to talk about syntaxes and how it's better to write your code, I'm going to show you one more trick with these curly brackets around our different parts of the code. Because if, for example, you wrote on Python before, you know that on Python you don't need to use curly brackets. And actually in C++ there is also one situation when you can avoid these curly brackets around your else if statements is when your code is just one line. Since here I have one-liners, I can remove my curly brackets and let's try to execute our code like this. If now I build and run my program, enter your age, let's say my age is 45, and you can see that it's still working. I have outcome, sorry, you don't meet our requirements. But you should take in your mind two things. First, that you can skip curly brackets only if your code is one-liner. If you want to put several lines of the code for different conditions, you should always frame them in the curly brackets if you don't want to get some unexpected results or compiler mistakes. And second thought is just you shouldn't mix different styles. If, for example, I use curly brackets here, but I'm not going to use curly brackets for the next line, you can already see that it looks not very readable, not very pleasant. So if you already started to use curly brackets, you need to use curly brackets, use these curly brackets everywhere. But if you have a very simple check where for each condition you have only one line of the code, in this case you can avoid curly brackets. One more interesting syntaxes I want to show you at the end of this lesson is condition operator. So let's say we have situation when some parents want to decide what will be the name of their child, but they don't know the gender of this child. So they're thinking, okay, if the gender will be male, we are going to give him one name, but if it will be a girl, we are going to give her a different name. So let's create bool variable is male, and we are going to create also string variable name. And as I told you, now we have some kind of if else statement. If our child is male, we are going to name our child, let's say David. Else, if it's a girl, not male, we are going to name her Julia. Okay, now let's check the outcome of our program. Cout name, and I'm going to initialize our bool variable is male with true. And let's build and run our program, and you can see that since our child is male, we have name David. And in programming we have lots of situation when the value of variable is one if some condition is true and different when this condition is false. So for this situation you can use condition operator that make your code much more cleaner and readable. I will remove this if else statement, and I'm going to initialize our name, our variable with the next value. I'm going to check our bool variable is male. I'm going to write the question mark, and I'm going to write name David. Now I'm going to write column, and I'm going to write the name Julia. Now let's build and run this code and check the result, and you can see that result is still David. If Ismail is false, let's build and run our code again, and you can see that if Ismail is false, result is Julia. So this question and column operators are called condition operator. So what's happened in this piece of the code? The first piece before the question mark is actually our test, our condition that is true or false. And after our question mark, we have a value that will be assigned to our variable if condition is true. So if Ismail, if this condition is true, we are going to assign this string, this value David, to our name. But if this condition is false, for this purpose we use value after column. So if Ismail is false, we're going to assign Julia to our name. Okay, this is it, guys. It's all I wanted to show you in this lesson. I hope it helped you a lot, and now you can use if-else statement and if-else-if statement. You can use condition operator. Now you know about the logical operators, you know about the comparison operators. If you have any questions regarding this lesson, just write them in the comments, and I'll see you in the next lesson.